Hello there and good afternoon. Welcome to today's Ukraine War Q&A with Professor Michael Clarke. Professor Clarke, it's always great to have your company, of course, and your expertise, and it's good to have your company as well today. It's going to be a slightly shorter version. I know that we usually run to about 45 minutes. We're going to truncate it. No quick fire round, Michael, so not so long.
Quick fire all the way through.
Quick fire all the way through, or just long answers as long as we're doing in 25 minutes. But we'll get straight into it. We'll accept your questions as well, of course, if you can, in the YouTube comments or via our website. But let's kick off with this question, first of all, from Gareth. The first bunch of these questions, actually, concern China and their involvement in this war because of the fact that President Xi Jinping has made a big deal about going to be part of Victory Day alongside Putin. We saw pictures of him just this morning. So this first question, Michael, is from Gareth. It says, what, if anything, can be read into Xi's efforts to be in Moscow today? And what is China's stance on US efforts to end the war?
Yeah, I mean, it is a big plus for President Putin to get Xi there in person. It's only his second visit to Russia ever. I mean, they've met many times, but this is only Xi Jinping's second visit into the country. And to go for the victory parade is a very big symbolic moment. I mean, Xi Jinping has said from the beginning of this war that he's neutral, that they take a neutral stance, they'd like to be a peacemaker. Nobody in the rest of the world has really believed that. And now he's making it pretty clear. I mean, he can stick to those words if he wants to, but nobody really believes it because there he is, offering real support. And in the speech he made yesterday, in 2022, China and Russia said that they had this unbreakable bond,
limitless,
alliance, endless, open-ended. And yesterday he said, we are friends of steel.
Yep.
Friends of steel, I think that was the phrase. And as I was saying, there's a sort of literal truth to that, because the amount of dual-use goods the Chinese are sending to the Russians to keep the war going is increasing all the time. So it's a moment where, in a way, Xi Jinping has sort of come off the fence, officially now. What does he think of American efforts? We don't know. The Chinese still have their 12-point peace plan, which they launched a couple of years ago, which could be the basis of some sort of discussion. But they're standing back because it suits the Russians for the Chinese to stand back, because the Russians still think that they have more to gain from carrying on fighting for the time being, at least for the rest of this year. And China is, in effect, supporting that effort to keep on fighting, though they claim not, but actually they are. If they wanted to stop the Russians fighting this year, they wouldn't send them so much dual-use technology.
No, well, that's the point, isn't it, Michael? I'm sure that more could be done if they really wanted the war to come to an end. And it's worth sort of passing some of the statements between the two men. The term root causes was used as a way of bringing the war to an end, which is, of course, the Russian phrase, root causes.
And root causes, I mean, that's the sort of code word in Russian thinking at the moment for discussing everything, not just Ukraine, but NATO and the new members of NATO and where the borders are and so on, and the so-called Nazification of Ukraine, for which there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever. The Nazi party or Nazi sympathizing party in Ukraine, even in coalition with all of its allies, in the 2019 election, the last election, got less than 2%. Less than 2%. And there's the AfD in Germany, who are the second largest party.
Yeah, I mean, extraordinary. Volodymyr Zelensky, who's a Jewish man, I believe, would be the head
and
of
there's
the Nazi
Zelensky,
party.
his Jewish heritage,
right?
Russian speaker,
So, just the final thing on the Chinese peace plan. What have the Ukrainians said about this plan? I mean, it's not often talked about that they had a structure in place to try and bring peace quite a few years ago.
Yes, that's right. And the Ukrainians, I mean, didn't pay much attention to the Chinese plan, but they rejected it because a couple of years ago the Ukrainians thought that they would do better on the battlefield than in reality they've been able to do for the last 18 months. But it's still there. And if Xi Jinping decided to become the mediator again, then the Chinese plan is probably the sort of an outline that could be the basis of some sort of negotiation, because it covered most issues. But essentially, the Chinese plan was based around the idea of a ceasefire in place, so letting Russia keep the gains that it's made on the battlefield. And that would still be China's view, I think.
Doesn't sound too dissimilar to some of the contours of the plan that Witkoff and Trump have been
Exactly,
pushing, right?
The Chinese and the American approaches are not that dissimilar, because both of them are extremely cynical, which says you've got to let Russia keep the conquests that it's made and then work on something to make Ukraine a viable state afterwards. They're basically on the same page as far as that's concerned. But again, I go back to the point, the Chinese don't want to push their peace plan at the moment because they're on board with Putin trying to conquer more territory before anybody gets round to that sort of peace plan.
Yeah. A question here from Henry C. Thank you for this one. And It brings to mind something that you and I talked about before, Michael, and the sort of the three global leaders all leading these nations that want to basically divide up the world between each other. Henry asked the question, could Trump's leadership, he says premiership, seemingly aggressive stance to China push Russia and China even closer together and encourage China to become more active in the war? Or could the opposite happen as China looks to Europe as an economic antidote to US aggression? I mean, you have said that you think that some of the Trump strategy might be trying to peel Russia away from China.
That's right. It's called the Nixon doctrine in reverse, because in 1972 Nixon opened to China in what was then a reasonably successful attempt to peel China away from Russia when Russia was much the stronger power between the two. And some have said, well, what Trump is trying to do by getting up close to Russia with a strategic partnership is peel Russia away from China. Now, that's not clever policy, and it's not even good history, to be honest. And the chances of peeling Russia and China apart at the moment are not great. They're really not great. And when you look at Chinese, the second part of that question is, I think, very opposite. When you look at Chinese trade with Europe and with the United States, it dwarfs even their increased trade with Russia.
Right.
So the Chinese are doing something like, last time I looked, it was $200 and something billion worth of trade with Russia, where they're doing $600 and $700 billion worth of trade with Europe and with the United States. And that won't change. Of course, they'll do less trade now with the tariff war.
45% tariff.
But as that settles down in, say, a year's time or something like that, with a global recession on the way, we'll see where that sort of lands in economic terms. But the fact is, the Russians need the Chinese. They are not going to peel away towards the Americans, because they are absolutely now, Putin is a client of Xi Jinping, no question about it. And that dependence, if anything, the longer the war goes on, the more that dependence will grow. Because although Putin may succeed on the ground in taking more Ukrainian territory, his economy is suffering more and more for those marginal gains that he's making. And I'm not trying to sort of trivialize those gains on the ground, because they're pretty important in terms of the principle of naked aggression. But the longer the war goes on, the more the Russians will become a client of China, the more they'll need Beijing. The idea that the Americans can peel them away, I think, is extremely fanciful.
I mean, and the Russians need China way more than China needs Russia.
Absolutely.
Is that
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, I was struck by something that Donald Trump says. I mean, in those news conferences, you're often wondering whether or not this has been a thought-through statement, or if it's, just something he's saying off the cuff. Michael says
one of Donald's riffs.
One of Donald's riffs. But he said something that was remarkable. He's talking about China and the tariff policy and the sort of the tension that is between the two nation states. And he said, well, if China opens up, it'd be great for the country, it'd be great for the people there. I mean, whether or not that will be taken seriously by anyone, how would that sort of idea land? Because it starts to sound like, if you open up, if you become a bit more like us, then we will be able to do trade with you, which the Chinese
Well, what he means, I mean, he's making a point that is an economic point, the point that economists make. He said that China's growth is based on export manufacturing, not on consumer demand within China. And what he's saying is that you need your consumers to buy more, because there's an awful lot of poor people in China. And as Susan Shirk, the great Chinese analyst, she said, China will get old before it gets rich. If you look at the demography of the country, at least Japan got rich before it got old. But there you are, China will get old before it gets rich because of the inequalities of income in China. And what Trump was really saying is what economists have said. If the Chinese could find ways of expanding their own domestic market, they wouldn't export so much of this damn stuff to the rest of us, and trade would be a bit more equal. So Trump's point there, I mean, it may have been a riff, but it was that there is an economic
Sounds like you think he's making
it.
sense. Yeah, he's making sense for you, Michael,
There's
isn't
an
he?
economic idea behind it.
Okay, good. We'll give him the points for that then. Well done, yes. Well done, President Trump. All right, final question now on the China situation is from a handle called Big Fan. Thanks, Big Fan. Big fan to yours. Given how closely Russia and Chinese interests have become over trade and energy these past couple of years, for the reasons you've pointed out, Michael, and the splinters that Trump has called in Trump's cause among Western alliances, is it fair to say that China, with Russia as its ally, is now the global superpower?
No, it isn't, but it is gaining in power all the time, in crude terms. If you look at projections for the global economy, by the year 2050, China and the United States will probably be about equal in terms of the world economy. We used to always ask this question: when does China overtake America as the biggest economy in the world? And we used to say, oh, it's going to happen in 2020, 2022, 2023. It was always about now, and it hasn't happened.
Interesting.
But it will happen on the trajectory. But it partly depends on how America moves. Russia is almost irrelevant in this respect, since the Russian economy is, in relative terms, shrinking. Its population, like populations of Northern Europe, is shrinking. Its GDP is not growing very much. I mean, it's growing more now because of war expenditure, but it's real GDP and the structure of the Russian economy is all over the place at the moment. So Russia will not emerge, I don't think, as some sort of economic superpower, and it's totally dependent still on energy, on gas and oil. And, you know, the gas and oil prices are drifting downwards. The oil price this week was down at 55 at Brent crude and West Texas intermediate, wasn't it?
The internet tell me
WTI, that we were talking about a little while ago.
Brent crude was down at 62.
But lower than that for West Texas, I think. But anyway. But anyway, prices are drifting down, and that will really bother the Russians. And if prices are depressed because of a world recession for some time, then that really does give the Russians a problem. So, I mean, in superpower terms, the United States has the wherewithal to remain the world's most important superpower, particularly if it finds a better way of integrating or of working with the economies of Canada and Mexico. As we said before, you know, Canada, Mexico, and the United States, between them, are a real economic powerhouse of about $25 trillion worth of combined GDP a year, which is bigger than the European Union, bigger than China, bigger than anything. There will come a time when, you know, China and the United States are the two great powers, the two superpowers for the 21st century. That's baked in. When China becomes the superpower and really overtakes the United States, is quite a long way down the line.
Right, and we've missed the deadline that you guys had always sort of set about it being around about now. Just on WTI, it was down to 57 earlier in the week.
Well,
it's recovered slightly to sort of 60.
WTI, West Texas Intermediate, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Very light oil. That's very light.
Well, they're going to dig baby dig, aren't they? So they're going to be getting all that stuff out of the ground.
And frack baby frack is the other one. Yeah.
Incredible stuff. Fossil fuels. I mean, who knew that we'd still be doing all of that at this point? But I suppose that's what tells us whereabouts we are in history, doesn't it, Michael? Let's move on to some of the questions here about how the war could resolve. And a question here from Frank Poker about Crimea. It was a week or so ago now, wasn't it, that as part of the plan suggested. Was it ever actually clear that this was part of the plan, that Crimea, recognised as Russian territory, would... It
was briefed that the United States would recognise Crimea's legitimacy as a Russian territory. That was briefed. Right. But, of course, the plan didn't go any further than that.
Well, Frank Poker's question is, what would change if that were to happen, if there would be official recognition of Crimea? What would it mean for Putin and Russia?
Well, if there were official recognition of Crimea, in the world as a whole, that would be a really important principle, because that's recognising and legitimising the change of borders by force. I mean, Crimea was seized by the Russians in 2014 illegally, and if we now said, well, we regard that as a legal transfer of territory, then that opens the door to, you know, crude, naked aggression and imperialism, not just in Ukraine but elsewhere in the world. What the Americans seem to have been saying is that we, the United States, as the most important power in the world, we might recognise Crimea. But I could promise you that the Europeans wouldn't. The vast majority of the Europeans wouldn't. I don't think the United Nations would. They certainly wouldn't have got a consensus for it. And so what the Americans were kind of offering Putin was a partial recognition. The US and a few other states might recognise it, but a lot of others wouldn't. And the Ukrainians, why should they recognise it? I mean, they don't have the power to retake Crimea. They don't. But that doesn't mean to say that they can't maintain their legal claim, because it's part of Ukrainian territory, as legally established at the United Nations in 1991, when modern Ukraine came into existence, along with modern Russia. The Russian Federation dates, just like Ukraine, from 1991. Regardless of the fact that they both have ancient histories, their current status in world politics, both of them, go back to 1991 and no further.
Yeah, and Crimea is Ukraine. I mean, the question here from Alan of Swaffham on Crimea. He says, Russian defence assets on Crimea appear to be moderately compromised. How many Russian troops are there, if we know, garrisoned? And Alan asks, could not a combination of special forces, naval and airborne assets actually take it back?
Yeah, well, the number of troops is not a particular secret. It's about 30,000.
Garrisoned on Crimea currently, okay?
Yeah, about 30. The Russians have kept about 30,000 troops there since 2014, when they seized it, and they've used it as a garrison, which is not huge. I mean, they deployed 50,000 troops to retake Kursk in the last few months. So it's not a big base because, I mean, Crimea at the moment is quite a long way from the fighting.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't expect them to have too many troops there because they need them all on the front line. So it's about 30,000. And they've got a lot of air bases on Crimea, 3 or 4 big air bases. And of course, Sevastopol is the base of the base of the Black Sea Fleet. Could the Ukrainians take it? No, they can't. I mean, they're a long way away from that now. But what they might have done, and could maybe still do in the future, if their offensive last year, 18 months ago now, from Orikhiv southwards, if they could have got within striking distance of Crimea, regular striking distance with artillery and missiles, then they could have made Crimea unviable as a military base for the Russians. And then they could have made it very uncomfortable for the 800,000 Russians who've moved into.
I was going to say, people have been imported in, haven't they?
That's right, yeah, colonized.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, the last remnants, really, of the Tatar people, the Tatar Cossacks, were basically moved out in 2014. I mean, they were ethnically cleansed, effectively, and they're very unhappy about that, of course. And the place is now, I think, something like 90-something% Russian. So what Ukraine might do in the future, which is it can't do it at the moment, but it might be within their grasp if they keep on fighting, would be to make Crimea unviable as a military base, uncomfortable for the Russians who live there. And then with the turn of the geopolitical wheel in 1 or 2 generations, maybe then a Crimea, which is a real problem for Russia, might then be up for some sort of negotiated arrangement. And what might that arrangement be? Well, maybe autonomous status, more autonomous
It's
status.
a Russian satellite type thing. I mean,
Yeah.
with a million or so Russians there by that point, it'd be very, very difficult to imagine it being returned.
But I mean, the thing is, Crimea needs mainland, let's call it mainland Ukraine, much more than mainland Ukraine needs Crimea. And Crimea is easily cut off. There's only there's a northeast and a northwest road and rail route which links it to the bulk of Crimea, bulk of Ukraine, and then there's the Kerch Bridge across the Kerch Strait.
Of course, was
So it's only got 3 points of contact, 1 with Russia and 2 with Ukraine. And those 3 points of contact can easily be interfered with or even cut off completely. So Crimea needs Ukraine much more than Ukraine would ever need Crimea.
There's a question here from Christopher on this again, and I think you're kind of getting towards some of this, Michael. History is full of examples, Christopher says, of fudging how territory is divided up. Is there a way the US could make Putin feel Crimea is his, but Ukraine feel it's not lost forever?
Yeah, well, that's in a way, that's where we are now.
Yeah.
So the Ukrainians know that they can't retake Crimea anytime soon. But they also know they don't have to give up their claim. Why would they? Why should they? And I think one of the good examples of that is Japan and Russia after the Second World War. So in Hokkaido, which is northern Japan, the 3 southern Kuril islands were Japanese, and the Japanese still claim them. But at the end of the Second World War, the Russians were given southern Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands, and they took a string of islands which come right down to the northern part of Japan, looking at them across the strait, looking at Hokkaido across the strait. Now, the Japanese cannot take those 3 islands back, and they've never made any attempt to try, because that would be foolish. But they've never given up their claim to it. They say the southern 3 Kuril Islands are Japanese territory, and they'll maintain that claim for 100 years, 150, 200 years. And if there is a big turn of the geopolitical wheel sometime in the next century, their claim will still be there on the table, and they'll say, these 3 southern Kuril Islands that we know are ours. Well, the time has come to rethink the status of them.
And this is why you must maintain the principle of these things,
Absolutely.
right, Michael? Because as soon as you say that that's fine, an aggressor can take land and we're going to give up on it, all the rules go out.
It's a really slippery slope.
Yeah.
They're agreeing to the transfer of territory by aggression. Once you legitimize that, then you legitimize it everywhere. There is one other thing that you can start to do. You can start to put it into an institutional arrangement by throwing it to an international commission. You can say, look, we'll have a commission on the future status of Crimea, and the commission can meet for 10 or 20 years and talk about it. And it's a way of kicking it into the long grass. So your claims sit with the commission. And whenever anyone says, what are you doing about your claim? Well, we're waiting for the commission, or we discuss it in the commission, and the commission will come up with some ideas as to how we might take this forward at some time in the future. And that's not the worst way of dealing with it. No. It's not the worst way.
I mean, there are partisan groups on Crimea that are still fighting and causing sort of disruptive
there's still sabotage going on.
On Russian. Yeah. What about the people? I mean, you talked about the import of these nearly 1 million Russians.
Yeah.
They're quite happy with Russian passports to be part of
they are.
Russian
Yeah. I know they like it because it's like living in the Mediterranean. I mean, Crimea is a beautiful place, and it does have a Mediterranean climate. It's where, Sochi, and it's where people go for their holidays. It's a lovely part of the coastline in the Black Sea, so it's very popular, and it's Putin's pride and joy.
He's got a big old house down there.
He has. Oh, absolutely. Because palace, an enormous palace, right next to the palace of Kirillov, who's the patriarch.
The Orthodox Church.
The Russian Orthodox Church in Moscow. And I mean, Putin's pride and joy. In 2014, when they seized Crimea, he claimed that they were just reacting to events and they didn't really know quite what was going on. He then boasted about it on a TV program in about 2018, how clever he'd been. And he takes pride in the fact that they deceived the world in order to grab Crimea. And he now admits everything that he did because he's proud of himself for it. So it's his pride and joy. And if he felt the Crimea was going to be lost, that would be a big, big problem for him personally.
Yeah, and it's extraordinary as well to think that they held the Olympics in Sochi as well that very same year that they seized it. It's just incredible that was allowed to happen. All right, a question here, Michael, from John, and it's comments made by General Sir Richard Sheriff recently, where he said that the only way to stop this war in Ukraine permanently is with Russia being defeated on the battlefield. I mean, John's question is General Sir Richard right?
Well, I think General Sir Richard's using the word defeat in a rather loose way, and I know he knows what it means, and he was sort of quoted a bit starkly. I mean, Richard Sheriff was Deputy Supreme Commander Europe, D-SACEUR as it's called, which is a very eminent position, and from that position he will have seen, the evolution of Russian military power over the years. He was a distinguished general and a very clever man. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure what he knows is that we're not really talking about defeat of Russia as the failure of this operation, the failure of the special military operation. In other words, Russia has got to be, in his view, he's got to be put in a position where this has failed to achieve its objectives and at inordinate cost. And the issue, what constitutes not defeat in the war, but the failure of the operation is the way the rest of the world sees it. If the rest of the world says, look, Putin initiated this whole thing in 2022, and look at it now in 2025, 2026. They've not taken any more territory. They've even been pushed out of some of the territory they started with in 2022, and look at the cost. It's a failure. If that's what the rest of the world said, then the Western world would settle for that because that's failure. But that's not what the rest of the world is saying. At the moment, the rest of the world is saying, actually, it looks as if he's going to do it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean victory in the war. It means he's prevailing, and the rest of the world thinks that they know that Putin wants the whole of Ukraine. Well, this is his third Ukrainian war, so he's winning it. Well, and there'll be a period of peace, and then the fourth Ukrainian war, he'll get a bit more and a bit more. That's
but that language was the language that was used by Boris Johnson. The direct quote is that Russia must fail and must be seen to fail, right?
That's right. And I think that language was quite carefully worked out. Not Russia must be defeated, because nobody wants to attack Russia, despite
you must
what
see that they haven't been able to achieve their goals. That's
exactly.
The point, right?
So Russia must fail in this operation. And that's what defeat in Ukraine would look like. Not defeat of Russia, but the failure of the operation at inordinate cost. We're a long way from that now. We thought we might be getting close to it in 2023, but we're not. I mean, things have turned around, and it looks as if the opinion of the world, particularly in the global south, will be Russia has succeeded. And the cost is very high, but that's their affair. If they're prepared to take the cost, that's up to them.
Did you see any of the Victory Day stuff earlier? I mean, I don't know if you saw Putin when he was walking around meeting the veterans. He had a swagger about him. He always swaggers, but he seemed very sure.
Absolutely, very sure of himself. Yeah. One of the things that they celebrate is the raising of the flag on the Reichstag on the 1st of May.
They were rehearsing
1945.
Reenactments.
Do you know who actually did that? On the 1st of May 1945, it was a man called Alexei Berest, and he was a Ukrainian. He was born in Sumy, 1921. He didn't live to be an old man. Died in 1970. And the man with him was a Georgian. They won't tell you that in Russia. Not now.
No.
But that in the Second War, it didn't matter. He was from Ukraine. He was part of the USSR. Born in Sumy. That was part of the Soviet Union. And he was celebrated right through to his death in 1970. But they won't tell you that now. Yeah, the flag on the Reichstag was raised by Alexei Berest. A Ukrainian.
A very, very complicated history. Right, final question then, Michael, because we're running short of time. This has gone very quick. I've enjoyed this one. Right, look, a couple of questions that kind of focus back in on the UK, still related to, of course, the war in Ukraine. Comes from Keith. What does Michael know about the recent reporting from the Homeland National Defence Plan to counter Russian attacks on the UK mainland?
If I told you, Kamali,
I knew you.
would have to
The
kill you.
sniff was everything. You can tell
I'd
me.
have to kill you.
What about those guys? You can tell them. You can look
Well,
like as well.
all right. It's no secret that the government thinks that we need to do a lot more about resilience, and it's no secret that we have started to worry about attacks on UK bases, such as Cyprus. I mean, foreign bases.
Yeah.
It's no secret that we think that we may need to develop some sort of ballistic missile defense, because it's possible that ballistic missiles, presumably carrying conventional warheads, could be sent against our ships in British waters, or even our ports or facilities. We would never have taken that particularly seriously until recently, but now we're taking it more seriously.
So the threat level has increased.
Much increased. And so we'll see when the defence review appears, and it still hasn't appeared yet, but it should appear before the NATO summit on the 24th of June. If it doesn't, it will be very, very embarrassing. Yeah. But when that appears, then I think we'll get a sense of how much the government thinks it needs to reorientate ourselves to internal resilience and defence.
Yeah. Final question, then, Michael. It's a topic that I can talk about all day. It's about drones. Given the Ukrainian-Russian war is now predominantly fought by drones, it's a question from Target J. Thank you. They wondered how the UK's technology stacks up and compares. I guess it's part of the strategic
not bad,
as well, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, I mean, the big drones that we've got, like Watchkeeper and Reaper, Protector, the RQ-8, are pretty big. BAE Systems have got this thing called Tyrannus, named after the Celtic god of thunder.
Yep,
Tyrannus,
okay.
Yeah, and that's huge. I mean, that's like it's like a bomber air.
Is that what you want, though? Don't you want smaller, like?
Yeah. Well, now the army runs things like Global Hawk, Black Hornet, a lot of very small drones which can swarm, get thousands of them in an area. The Navy's got Vixen and Vampire and Proteus. The thing about drones is not producing them, because they're cheap to produce and you can produce them at all sizes, from things from as big as Tyrannus to as small as Desert Hawk and Black Hornet, things like that. The issue is, one is, how do you control them?
Yeah.
Can you control them by AI? And we are on the verge of a revolution now where drones can be run in their thousands, not in their dozens, but in their thousands, and organised really well. And we're on that, and we're pretty good on that. I mean, we haven't got it yet, but we're pretty good on that technology. And then the second question is, what do they carry?
Yeah. Do
they carry bombs? Do they carry small explosives? Do they carry cameras, sensors? They can carry everything in principle. So where is Britain on this? Well, we're certainly investing heavily in drone technology of big, medium, and small. I think, I'd have to kill you if I told you, etc., etc. But we are probably about to invest a lot in AI to actually organise drones in the way that would fit the 2040s and 2050s. And then the question is, what do they carry? And that's, I think, is possibly unresolved yet, because we're not entirely sure what sort of warfare we might be dealing with in 10 and 20 years' time.
And they're testing a cool drone-killing laser gun type weapon, aren't they?
Yeah, the laser guns are it's all James Bondy stuff. Lasers are less effective. They're very effective, but they're less usable than people think, because it's a pulse, and it's got to dwell on the target for some sort of fraction of a second. Now, if the target is spinning, it's got to dwell on it a bit longer.
Right.
Whenever people say to me laser gun, I say, tell me what the gun is pointing at, and I'll tell you 3 or 4 ways that the target can actually do something about the laser. Nevertheless, where they're relevant, and particularly relevant at sea, the Navy will do well out of laser guns at less than £1 a go. A pound a shot. Yeah. You can't beat that. But they're not. It's not like a death ray that will protect you against everything. They'll protect you against some things very well, but they're not as relevant as the science fiction writers and James Bond script writers would have you believe.
We can still dream, though, Michael, and we'll enjoy thinking about that, and we'll discuss that more. We're going to wrap it up there. Thanks, everyone, for watching. You can join us again next week if you're available, the 14th of May.
For you, Kamali, of course.
Oh, you're a good man, Michael. I'll be here if you are. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.